Welcome back to our series on how Policy Express can help you successfully manage your policies through the full policy management lifecycle. So in this video, I'm going to go into the second stage, which is the approval stage. And we're going to cover both workflow and the audit which supports that workflow. So when that workflow is complete, you've got a record of it. Before we dive in, let's have a consideration about what are the kinds of workflow scenarios that we see when we're looking at policies. So the first one is where we have an SME or subject matter approval process. And in this scenario, you know the people who are responsible for that kind of policy, normally grouped by department. So it might be a head of HR or maybe a director of people at a second level. And it may be a person or it may be a group of people. So we might have one or two steps around that. The second is, and we see this in enterprise organizations where they're looking for more of a free-form format because the effort to manage those user groups is too much and it's too complicated and there's too many changes. And so therefore we give the initiator the opportunity to choose who that policy should go to for review. We can also put a compliance check on this to ensure the initiator isn't approving their own policies. Now, combined with these two, or sometimes standalone, we also see the delegated approval process. And this is where a board or committee have met and they've agreed that a policy can go into place, and now they've rubber stamped it, and somebody, a representative from that delegated person, can go in and manually approve that policy on their behalf. And this could follow after maybe a subject matter approval process or a free-form approval process. So there's quite a few things going on there. So let's go and look at some examples. Typical example, and probably the most complicated that we see, is the initiator starts the process. It would go to a first approver, whether that's a subject matter expert or if it is just somebody else within the organization. Again, that process happens for a second stage. And then finally, we have what's called delegated approver. So it maybe goes to a board or committee for final sign off. And following that green light, we're then going to publish that policy into our policy hub for the employees to digest and read. We do have support other variations of this where maybe there isn't a delegated approval or where there's only one approver before we get to delegated approval. And as you can see, the iterations continue. Now, there's one final change which is probably worth noting, which is what we call a non-material change. And this can happen because of one of two reasons. Firstly, where a policy has a slight issue, maybe with formatting, and you want to go and make an update to it, but doesn't actually change the policy and doesn't therefore change the review date. Or secondly, you've got to that review period, maybe it's 2 years down, and actually nothing's changed, which requires the policy to go up for review again, and the policy will just remain in force. But what we want to do is push that review date out by another year or 2 years accordingly. And so those are a couple of scenarios that we can support under non-material change. Just in terms of those approval steps and what happens in that sign-off. So typically it's either one person to approve and we just send it to one person and we're not going to move on until they've approved it, or we can send it to a group of people but we're not going to move on until one person signed it. But in that case, the other two people don't need to do anything. Or we send it to a group of people and all of them must approve it before we go on to the next stage. So we've got options around that, and that can be set at a workflow level. One of the great things about Policy Express is we can create multiple workflows to support different scenarios, and then each document can be assigned its own workflow. So let's do our first demo based on the document we created in the last video. It was around the B Corp policy. We're going to send it to the board for approval, but first it's going to go to an individual for sign off. So let's go and start that. So I've come into our intranet. I'm going to go straight to our policy hub, which is linked here. Now the first view I'm going to get is my end user view. That's not the view I want. I want to actually go and look at the masters or the documents behind these published versions. So we're looking for the B Corp policy. I could use search if I have a large number of policies, but I know it's actually on the first screen here. So here's B Corp. So I've highlighted that. The other thing that we highlighted is we want to put it through a board approval. And as you can see, the approval type is set to board. So that is all good to go. Now I click on the three ellipses up here and we've got send for approval / publish. So this is an app that we've written, which improves massively on the standard Microsoft Power Automate apps because it helps us, A, provide some narrative about what we're doing. Secondly, we can create multiple fields here and validate those fields. And finally, here I've got this call to action. So let's go and put somebody in, and I'll put myself in this scenario, and I'm going to send that for approval. And as you can see, it's lightning quick. And now I can move on from this. Now, behind the scenes, we're going to be creating an email, which is going to send to myself in this case, and it's going to notify me that I've got to do that first approval. So let's open up email and see what that looks like. So I've opened up Outlook here, in the browser, but this can also be done on the desktop too. And I've received an email notification. And as it's saying, I've been assigned a document for first stage approval for B Corp policy. Now I can actually open this document from this link, but we know what this document looks like. So I am simply going to press approve and write all good. And now what's really smart is that email actually updates live. So if I come back to this email, I can see that actually this is the time I completed it and these are the comments I wrote. So I haven't got to think about, did I actually complete that? Now, as the policy owner, I've also got a notification that that process is complete. And now the next stage is that board approval process. So let's go back into SharePoint and see what that looks like. So I've come back into the policy hub here, and here's the document that we sent for that first approval. We've now had the board meeting. So let's click on send for publish and approval. And as you can see, the screen is updated now to reflect that the fact that we're now ready to manually publish this document on behalf of the board. So board has approved and the CEO approved it. And we recognize the fact that the date that when you apply this approval might not be the date when the board meeting happened, but we're going to make it the same. And if needed, if the board didn't approve it and rejected it, we've got the option to do that too. But we're going to publish the document now, and that will publish. And what we'll show in the next stage is how this has been converted from a Word document into a PDF for our employees to digest. So that was the first process. Now I want to run through a second scenario here, and this is where we've got subject matter experts aligned to a department who's going to help us with the publishing of that document. So let's go to our work from home policy, which we created earlier, and we're going to run through this process. Okay, so I'm now back in the document masters area of Policy Express, and we're going to put this work from home policy through our two-stage subject matter expert approval process. So I've selected the document, I go back to send approval and publish, and you can see the drop downs have now changed here, and we can specify who the people or person should be to approve it. So we could choose Ben and Amelia. And then the second approver in this case will be myself. Now we can specify whether both Ben and Amelia should be signing this before it progresses or just one of those, and that's set at the workflow level. So let's send that for approval. Now the approval process is very much like you saw before in the previous example with B Corp. So Ben will receive an email and he can approve it. And at that point, let's go back to B Corp and see what happened there. So because B Corp's now been approved, as you can see, we've got a next review date, which is actually 2 years from today. So that's already started the process. And when we get to the review stage, we'll see how the owner of this document will get that notification prior to that review date happening, so you can be on top of your policy management. Now let's just round this out, come back to our hub and just see if our B Corp policy has been published. So we're now back into our policy hub from the user perspective. As you can see, our B Corp policy has appeared at the top of the list because it's just been published. And we can click on that PDF and that's going to load up here. And as you can see, various information about the reference, approved by, and approved date has all appeared in that document. And when we've created those workflows, we can apply them to a single policy or multiple policies, depending on how complex your organization is. So that was a view of the published document, but let's go and check the audit trail about what happened there so you've got that evidence as well. So we can go back to our document masters and let's go back to the B Corp document. As you can see, there's a button here saying audit link. I can click on audit link and that's going to give me a history of what happened to that document there. So it's submitted, issued, approved, and then it was manually published and with my comments in there as well. So you've got that full audit trail for every single document. Now we've seen that, let's just summarize what we've seen in this short video. To summarize, we saw how we had the two different types of approval process, subject matter expert and freeform. And then we also added a delegated approval process to one of those to show how a board or committee could also be involved. In terms of those individual steps, we can either have one person to approve, or where you select multiple people, you can choose whether it's the first person or everybody must approve. And then when we look at those workflows, we can create multiple workflows to support different scenarios, and you can assign those either to one policy or multiple policies. So that completes the approval step. We looked at workflows. We also looked at the audit stage. Once it's approved, we're now going to consider publishing and how people actually access this policy.